we're really excited about today's topic. We use the term post-COVID. We know that we're still, have the COVID pandemic is certainly still occurring globally, but we believe that we're starting to see really good signs of emergence, particularly in certain geographies where the vaccine rates are getting higher, the vaccines are showing to be effective, and sales organizations are starting to look at, how do they transition back to what I'll call a new normal. So we're really thinking about some kind of new normal that's going to exist as we move forward from this. I was particularly intrigued when you sent out an email. I'm just going to read a couple of comments. Also really excited about Seismic. We've worked with Seismic in the past. We've had interesting conversation. I know in prepping for this with Sarah, we have a lot of interesting insights we're going to share. And as Alonzo mentioned, we want to keep it collaborative. But the email that Alonzo sent to Sarah and I was just some of the comments we got why people enrolled in this webinar. I thought I would just share a few of your comments from our participants. Number one, with an exclamation point at the end, need to increase my sales. So that's a good reason to join us today. Loved comment number two, the future belongs to those who are prepared. Third comment was better my coaching skills for my team while we work remotely. So coaching a remote sales team. Very interested in how sales organizations are dealing with sales enablement in a virtual world. And last one that I selected, there was a number of them, gaining knowledge and insights or remote sales enablement during these unusual times. And I think we're going to touch on all these topics. So I'm really excited. Let me just, I know Alonzo already introduced Sarah, but let me have Sarah say hello to everyone, and then I'll take us through our agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Norm. Happy to be here. Looking forward to today's discussion. One of the things that excited me, which we'll hop into in just a minute, is really getting a chance to define sales enablement with Norm and with each of you and talking about some of the key foundations that we can really work towards, especially as we move into a little bit more of that remote workforce that someone had mentioned earlier. So look forward to the discussion.
Terrific. Let me share our agenda for today. It should match with the webinar invite, but basically we want to talk about our title, The Power of Sales Enablement. A full year of takeaways that still apply. So even though we're emerging, there's so many things and some things that really were very positive. And I think there's been a lot of positives that have come out of this tragedy that we've all lived through, which is there's certain things that we didn't really think we could do in the past that we've found ways to do. Why customer-centric approach is vital for revenue growth, and that's become even more and become increasingly more important over time. So it's not that customer-centric is new, it's just that the importance right now is critical. We'll talk a little bit about how that impacts social selling. Also having the right conversations at the right time, the ability to align our conversations so that we're reaching people at the right time, very much tying to the customer-centric model. And then of course, sales managers are kind of the linchpin, particularly those frontline managers, and making sure we can take all this great work that's happening in our organizations and enablement and really implementing that in a flawless way so we're maximizing our productivity. So those are our topics for today. We'll work through each section, but before we do that, I'm going to ask Alonzo to bring up the following poll because it's interesting. And the question we want to ask is, how did the COVID-19 crisis impact your revenue in the last calendar year in 2020? And from my experience, and be interested in Sarah's, is it really is very dramatic differences. If I was talking to a client in the hospitality industry, it may be significantly down. If I talk to someone who's offering software as a service, it could be dramatically up. So Sarah, your thoughts on this as we're polling the audience?
Yeah, what's interesting is I think regardless of industry, right, when we look at revenue from an enablement perspective, the need and the way to pivot as we move forward post-COVID is still there, right? So I think a lot of the approaches that we're going to be discussing are going to be applicable regardless, right? And I think going to strengthen, again, whether you saw a great increase last year or not. I think it's all going to be applicable for each of you.
So Alonzo, can we go ahead and share the poll? It looks like we've got a really pretty wide variety here. So first thing that was really positive is no one's revenues were down over 50%. So that's great. Unfortunately, we had a pretty large percentage that was down 26 to 50%. I think that's going to bounce back very rapidly. I think the financial markets are somewhat predicting that. So again, it may depend on your industry, but that's going to come back. Down less than 25%, kind of the most common answer, not surprising. Some good news for some people, 10% roughly, or at 27%, excuse me, held steady. And at 20%, revenues are actually up. So again, we think this depends a lot on industry. generally a little bit more down than up in 2020. We think those numbers are going to look much, much better. At least from my vantage point, I think these numbers are going to look a lot better in 2021, which really gets us into today's topic. How are we getting fully back, in terms of a sales enablement structure? So with that, Alonzo, if we can close the poll, we'll move on. And thank all of you for sharing the information from the poll. Sarah, any takeaways before I move on?
No, I think we're good. Let's hop in.
All right, sounds good. So I want to start with just kind of a textbook definition of sales enablement from Sales Enablement Society. Basically ensures that buyers are engaged at the right time in the right place with the right assets by a well-trained client-facing staff, really taking them through the world-class experience on the customer's journey. And what's sales enablement actually do? It optimizes the selling motion in order to increase pipeline. So that's probably been one of the biggest themes talking to clients this year is we want to increase our pipeline. A lot of companies are using the expression pipeline coverage. One big win larger deals. So, during the COVID epidemic, a lot of the deals were smaller. A lot of companies had to adjust their headcount, and they want to drive profitable, sustainable growth. So the definition, makes a lot of sense. But, Sarah, can you tell us how, so let's say I totally buy in. I believe the people who are attending today, our participants really do buy in. How do we actually get started? So maybe you could just kind of walk us through. I'm a believer. I want to get going. How do I get started?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks, Norm, for teeing this up here. I think, as I mentioned before, I was excited to work with Norm on this webinar because we have the opportunity to review that formal definition of enablement. But as we all know, enablement is still an evolving industry, right? And although that's exciting because we do get to take charge of what that looks like within our organizations, it also leaves the door open for a lot of interpretation. And so from one organization to another, you could have a different definition of enablement. You might also have a different definition of enablement from one stakeholder to the other that you're working closely with. And so it's extremely important that whether you already have an enablement function within your organization or you're brand new and you really want to start this new concept and function within your company, that you have these three, I'll call them key pillars, right? And this is really going to set you up for success so that you're able to define the scope and responsibilities of what your team is doing. And also, probably even more importantly, help to make sure that as the year progresses and priorities are pivoting and things might be changing within your organization, you're staying very close and in tune with what your priorities are and how that's going to impact the business, right? So as we look at the first pillar here, starting from left to right, we look at the enablement vision. And I know vision is kind of a lofty word, right? We hear it all the time, but this is really the essence of what's your team's why. And so Norm just went over that formal definition of sales enablement. And some of those keywords that we heard was buyer journey, right? Making things customer centric and really focusing on that customer experience. And so for us at Seismic, that's a key focus on what drives our responsibilities and what we do each day and each year. And what is also going to help do is rather than just being a function that might ladder up to different things within your company, we're really trying to make enablement mission critical. And so again, having that succinct vision, even if you're a one-man team right now, what does that look like 18, maybe 24 months in the future as you build and scale? So again, having that vision will help you move forward appropriately. The other key pillar is defining your objectives and responsibilities. So a lot of the time, I'm sure some of you can relate, if not everyone on this call, a lot of times enablement can sometimes be looked as the fire department, right? There's fire drills that come up. We have competitive pivots and sales trainings and all these different things that happen throughout the year. And sometimes if we don't always know who owns those, they're thrown over to enablement and we can get caught up in those whirlwinds and fire drills. So although those are inevitable, there are going to be times where we need to address those. And it's important to carve out some time for that ad hoc needs. It's also just as important to truly define what are the objectives and make sure those ladder up to the company's objectives as well, right? So as long as you're in line with what the company's priorities are, that's going to help you understand where your key responsibilities should be as well. And then last but not least here is the enablement roadmap. So you can really define this for yourself as far as cadence. A best practice that I would suggest is doing this quarterly. So on a quarterly basis, making sure that you're communicating with your executives or key stakeholders exactly what are the big rocks, those big initiatives that your team is working on for the year, or excuse me, for the quarter, and some of the tactical elements that they might be most interested in. And this helps give executives and again your key stakeholders a quick snapshot so that everyone is aligned, everyone understands what enablement is doing, and again, how it's going to impact the business and your internal customers.
So I think it's really interesting, and particularly this area when you mentioned fire drills. We see in so many organizations that fire drills start to become the essence of what an organization is doing, as opposed to really focusing on its vision. So obviously, we've got to put out those fires, we've got to deal with those mini crises, but they should become the essence of what we do. And from our perspective, I think that really gets to responsibility. So I'd love it if you could just take a couple of minutes and just kind of go through how responsibilities helps prevent the fire drills and really keeps us focused on that vision.
Absolutely. So as we look at responsibilities, we really bucketed them into 4 areas. This helps our team especially, and hopefully will help some of you as well, really just compartmentalize where you should be focusing. And again, what's going to drive the most impact, right? So first and foremost is process. This could be anything from if you're focusing just on sales, right? So what is their account planning process, right? Potentially, what is the sales to the customer success handoff, right? Post sale. Are there things that are really impacting the buyer experience that you want to make sure you can smooth out across your buyer's journey? So that's one bucket. The next one is content. So one of the pieces of the definition Norm shared earlier is making sure our sellers are having the right conversations at the right time, right? And content is certainly a part of that. So not to say that the enablement team should be creating all of the content, right? Marketing is a huge partner for enablement. So making sure that you're staying lockstep together, but making sure that we're really activating that content appropriately, that our sellers know what content exists, how to use it, and have the appropriate context of when they should be using it and when it's going to be most effective. The third bucket is all around enablement services and those ad hoc, sometimes fire drills that come up, right? So this is all about creating scalable and repeatable trainings, onboarding, things that are happening again throughout the quarter or the year, where your team is really building the proper training available for your sales team or for whoever your internal customers are. And last but not least is the tech stack. So this is important as far as making sure that our sellers know the tools that they're using and that they all fit together appropriately, right? We want to make sure that our sellers aren't able to do their job effectively because they may be confused or, of where to go to find certain resources, where to go to find certain things about their accounts, right? And so making sure that all of that is aligned across the board for them to be most effective in their day-to-day.
So I really love this definition with the 4 buckets, because if we get the right processes in place for the sales team, we work with marketing to get the right content and serve it up at the right time, so we have the right assets for the right time for the conversation with the customer. We're providing the training, we can respond to the ad hoc requirements, and then we have the right technology. And I think a little bit, in terms of the goals associated with that, and it kind of reminds me of a training we do at Sales Readiness Group on leadership. And we have a model called VGST, and I think it ties in really well here. The V stands for vision, and the goal stands for goals. So, and then it goes to strategies and tactics. But if you could just kind of take for us and tie the goals to the vision piece that you mentioned before, it really kind of gets down to brass tacks. Well, okay, how do we actually do this?
Yeah, absolutely. So all the previous 2 slides, this is all aligning to these goals, right? And Norman, to your point. So I'll hit on these 4 areas as well. So first and foremost is alignment, right? We are very customer centric in our approach. That's our approach at Seismic from the enablement team, and making sure that our team is not only aligned first and foremost, but that we're breaking down the silos internally that could be impacting the customer experience as well, right? So those could be with our internal partners. I mentioned marketing as one. Our executives absolutely is another. So that brings me to the leadership team area, where we want to make sure that we are communicating on a regular basis, right? And I would suggest quarterly with your leadership team exactly what's going on and why. But not only the leadership team, also your internal customers. The more that you're able to communicate what you're focusing on and how it is going to benefit them, right? What's in it for them, the more buy-in they're also going to have. And you're going to notice that it's going to be a lot easier to hit some of your goals, especially when it comes to those training areas. Enablement tech stack I touched on earlier. Really making sure that you have the right tools in place for not only for trainings, but also to make sure that your sellers know what tools to use and when. And analytics. So this one is unique in the sense that, as I mentioned, enablement, we're still evolving. Analytics absolutely is in that evolving category as well. So this is something that people are still trying to hone. And speaking with enablement practitioners from all different organizations, no one has gotten the exact perfect recipe on exactly how to measure that ROI, right? So one of the things that we talk about often is making sure that what you're doing as the enablement team, I would suggest measure everything up front. And then at the end of the quarter, end of the year, that's when you can go back and take a look at the trends that you're seeing. You might find trends that you didn't even think of originally. And that way you'll be able to kind of weed out what doesn't make the most sense to tell your story. But you at least have everything to start with, and then you can determine moving forward what makes the most sense to measure to make sure that you're getting that ROI. And then again, you can share that with your leadership team as you move forward.
So Sarah, thank you. This makes a ton of sense to me, and it just kind of make the alignment of the goals, making sure we're communicating not just up to the leadership team, but I love the idea of kind of what's in it for the actual frontline team as well. The tech stack, which you commented about, and agree with you. Measurement is key. We're going to start to find if we measure over a longer period of time, we're going to see some really interesting patterns, and from there we're going to be able to establish some takeaways. And the good news is, with the right tech stack, that the ability to analyze and measure is in place. So very, very powerful in terms of what sales enablement can accomplish. If you have any questions about this section, I'm going to move on to our next section on some key takeaways that apply. But again, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A, which Alonzo is monitoring. We'll take questions now or along the way, but really interesting and obviously very powerful. So I mentioned at the outset, there was these, kind of takeaways, things that we learned during the COVID crisis that we can apply as we emerge and get post-COVID. But, one of the keys is just virtual selling. And all of us, whether it's on a webinar or in a sales call, we're much, much more comfortable in front of our webcams. We kind of know what the best practices are. And if we think about it, we just kind of roll back the clock a year ago, it was kind of all over the map. So I think that people have really mastered virtual selling. Social selling has become increasingly key, just the ability to use social networks, to use LinkedIn, to navigate, to really map accounts. Another key trend we saw is that, we're in the training business, sales training, sales management, is that pretty much all instructor-led training was, put on pause for 12 or more months during the COVID crisis. And we saw new and I believe better forms of learning emerge in terms of collaborative learning and peer-to-peer learning, and using new ways to leverage virtual sessions like webinars, virtual sessions, smaller group cohorts, and to use self-paced training and to really combine those. And the office environment is going to look different in the future. The office environment of the past is going to look different. Companies are talking about staggered weeks. They're talking about on-site, off-site. Some companies coming back sooner. Some companies not planning to come back till 2022. So we have a lot of kind of takeaways. And there's an interesting study, and we've cited in one of our webinars before, but I wanted to bring it up again. It was from Gartner. And basically, in B2B, it says that 80% of B2B sales interactions will occur in digital channels. And, that's by 2025. And I'm not sure I would have really understood the magnitude of this had we not gone through what we learned during COVID. But if we think about it, pretty much 100% of our interactions have been in digital channels in the last year. So, Sarah, I didn't know if you had any thoughts about this, but to me, this was just a staggering number.
Yeah, the number, given the last 12 plus months doesn't surprise me. It's the fact that it's, 80%, right? It is a staggering number, but I think it makes sense. And we'll jump in, I think, in a minute into how our sellers can really take advantage of that.
So we have an interesting white paper we published. Again, if you're interested, we could, it's on the 4 E's of virtual selling. I'm not going to cover it all here, but it does get to what we really learned during COVID that we should continue, which is, first of all, having the right environment. So we have people now who understand how to kind of dress for success, how to arrange the lighting, how to get the right headsets, how to have the right experience, how to manage a group environment if it's a group type of sales environment. So just getting that right. And then understanding that we have to bring energy, that we can't just be in a monotone, that we have to actually have interactions. We're going to have webinars, they have to be interactive. We have to find ways to collaborate. We have to have empathy. I see people with their pets running around, kids running around in the background. People have multiple responsibilities. It's a different world. And what we learned is people have different challenges, people have different situations, and really bringing that, I think that actually strengthens the relationship. And then we have to find ways to engage. We're finding ways to engage with each other's. I mean, we have later today an SRG happy hour that we're doing virtually. It's shocking, surprisingly good how many clients come and join and really enjoy that experience. So we're finding new ways to collaborate and engage. And as part of this, kind of very closely connected to virtual selling is social selling. And I know at Seismic, you guys have done some work around this. And Sarah, do you just want to kind of share with us what you've learned about social selling?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, based on some of the facts you just mentioned, Norm, I don't think it's a surprise to us, right? Decision makers are changing a little bit. And I think it's really important to start there and really understand what's happening with our buyers, right? And so you can see some of these numbers here at the top of the slide, but almost 85% of our executive buyers use social media for their purchase decisions, right? And the reason for that is we're seeing more millennials now step into the roles and really becoming those true decision makers. Millennials have had social media for a very long time, right? And they're used to, this is a part of their daily life. They are used to being able to hop on, have that instant gratification and researching not only the products and services that they're using, but the people that they're interacting with, right? So this is interesting where 62% of those decision makers are interested in, again, not only those products or services, but who exactly is the seller that they're interacting with and what are they all about, right? And I think it's important to remember that when we think of social selling, this is an extension of your personal brand. What you put online, what you put out there for people to see is going to represent you, your expertise, your thought leadership, or lack thereof, right? If those things are missing. So for sellers, this is really a whole nother tool to differentiate yourself, especially over the last year. And as we continue to be remote, it's really important. How else are you going to tell your story and differentiate yourself from folks if you can't be in person, right? There's a lot of competition that we're all up against. And so it's important to use social media, again, to your advantage, being able to build trust and connections, reaching out to people that maybe you wouldn't have met or spoken to otherwise. Being authentic and purposeful. So I think it's an important point not to inundate your social media with things that may not be relevant to your buyers or relevant to your brand or how you want to represent yourself, right? So being very purposeful in how you interact with folks is important. And that is really how you're going to be able to increase your engagement and your credibility. If your potential buyers feel as if they're having these personalized interactions, even though they may be remote, that's really going to increase, again, not only the engagement that you have, but your credibility as their seller.
Absolutely.
So I think
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I was
no,
going to say,
no, go ahead.
A lot of, companies are engaging in this area. We work tangentially with a lot of partners who focus on social selling. We've added courses on virtual selling. I think this is really, it's where the marketplace is going as more and more millennials are kind of becoming kind of the largest group within organizations. We have a question, sir. I don't know if you have the answer to it now. If not, we can get back. But it's from Carrie. And the question is, does the 84%, is it just B2B or is it both B2B and personal? And so I didn't know if you knew.
Yeah, that's a great question. This is focused on B2B.
Okay. And that, I guess, just generally between, the work that we do and the work that Sarah does, there are definitely things that very much carry over to B2C, but most of what we're presenting is in the B2B type of realm. So great question. And thank you for asking. And again, if you have additional questions, put them in the chat. We'll try and either handle them in real time or at the end of the session. And I know Alonzo is monitoring that for us. I want to touch on this idea of collaborative learning, kind of a whole different broad topic, but there's sometimes questions, what does collaborative learning really mean? and it can be used for so many different things. But one of the most things we've become very used to is what I'll call microlearning. Microlearning are short. People don't really want to watch long videos. They'd rather see something broken up into a series of 23-minute type of sound bites where they could actually learn one or two things and apply. So microlearning, combining that microlearning with small group cohorts, maybe using virtual instructor-led training. We do that a lot with our programs where we actually flip a classroom. People go through the microlearning first, and then we come back and we have a discussion group, often on Fridays. During that period of time, people can apply the skills. They have missions, they have field work, peer-to-peer collaboration. So there's a lot of discussion that's going on, discussion with the session leaders, discussions with each other, commenting, lots of tools and resources. Mentioned millennials before, but gamification. So as you start thinking going forward, we don't think this is going away. We do think that there will be a migration back to the traditional classroom. I mean, we've been away from that for a year, and some things are really done very, very well. But this notion of space learning and collaborative learning really is become very powerful, allows people spending more time in their primary job, which is selling, and you'll be able to chunk out that learning over a longer period of time, which we think also happens to build sustainability. I think the wild card for many of us is what will the environment look like going forward? I live in Seattle. I put sunny Seattle at the front today, and I drive by downtown and I see all these cranes in process, and then I read about statistics in the business section with super, super high vacancy rates. And so I don't know if any of us really understand what's going to happen in the future. So the best way for us to understand is maybe to kind of get your sense. So we've got some other poll, and Alonzo, if you can help us, just, what's your office environment going to look like by the end of this year? So let me just paraphrase that. By the end of this year, do you think you'll have everyone back? Some kind of alternating days, maybe 50-50, some roles on the office, some not, or continue with 100% remote? And I don't really know what to expect here, but it's going to be really interesting just to pull, because again, I see the cranes, I see the vacancy rates, I see our own situation. So it'd be interesting to see what you all have to say. Sarah, any thoughts on what you think the office environment might look like?
Speaking with different folks and from my own experience, I'm leaning more towards of that blend, right? So where we might have some folks in the office, maybe alternating days. I know a lot of folks have really gotten used to their remote environment with the flexibility, right? So definitely a blend is what I'm thinking for most.
All right. Well, Sarah and I have the benefit of seeing the polls before they broadcast, but Alonzo, why don't you share them? And I think this would be actually a really interesting blog post to develop here. But if you could share the results. I mean, yeah. So most people are saying 50-50, but that's 38%. If you look, every one of these answers has a number of responses. So there is no kind of new normal. Some will have everyone back, but that's less than 20% of the organizations. Other are going to have alternating days. Some are going to have kind of this hybrid of 50-50, and some are going to continue with 100% remote. So I think that this is just one of the key takeaways from the pandemic, is that the office environment is going to look different, and it's going to look different by client. So very interesting, and thank you for sharing. But I think this also has to shape the fact that other than a small group, 18% that said everyone's back, we're going to have 82%, if this poll is accurate. And again, just, there's only the people here. But first of all, let me thank everyone for attending too. We have a really, really nice audience. We had great signups, and we have a great personal attendance today. But based on our audience, 82% are going to be working remotely some of the time. So I think the way we interact and what the key takeaways are going to continue to apply. So thank you again. We're going to kind of move on to our next section here. But before we do, any questions, please feel free to type them in. We'll try and get to them now or at the end of the session. So customer-centric approach. We've always talked about customer-centric, but it's become even more important based on some of the data that we're looking at and the way that people are buying today. Clients are, many times before they even engage with the seller, they've done a tremendous amount of research on the web. They've really been able to, so they're, I guess a way of saying that is they're farther along in their buyer journey than they ever have been before. And that means that we really need to focus on their needs. And so I'll share a simple model that we use. It's a buyer-centric model. And in the center, you see building relationships. So we think becoming, basically building that solid relationship. And the relationship is not about likability. I've blogged on this before. Likability is important. People buy from who they like. But in the past, if you were really likable, your company had a good product, you could probably get by. In going forward, that's not enough anymore. You need to be able to create value at each step of your customer's purchase process. So notice I'm mentioning the customer's purchase process. So we have to align how we sell with how our customers buy. So one of the biggest issues we often have is we have something we think is super compelling, but our customer's not open. So we have to think about how do we plan and how do we create openness. Enablement play a huge role there. Again, getting the right content to the right people at the right time. We have to ask questions to help them focus on their needs. We have to then basically align our solutions and present value based on what we've learned and make sure that we closely align with what we've heard. We then have to help them evaluate because they have choices. They could maintain the status quo. They can go with a competitor. They can go with us. They can delay. So a lot of things that can happen. Those of us who are in sales see it all the time. So we have to be able to manage that feedback and realize that as people learn more, they may not race to a decision. So Sarah, one of the things I've always heard from clients, and I still see, in any sales organization, is they'll say, as we look at a pipeline where a deal stalled, well, the client's gone quiet. Well, why did that customer go quiet? It's because we're probably not in alignment. We're probably asking about a commitment and they're not at the decision phase. When they started to evaluate their options, they may have gone back to get more information or to even readdress their priorities. So as you become educated, you learn more. So this idea of buyer-centric is really important. And the macro point here is just aligning how we sell with the way that our customers buy. But sir, I know you guys have done some additional work around really what makes a compelling buyer experience. I'd love you to share that if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. So Norm, you hit the nail on the head as far as our buyers are more educated than ever before, right? And Carrie, to answer your question, although a lot of the stats that we're sharing are more B2B, this still applies even if we look at our own buyer experiences in a B2C world, right? So even as us as buyers, right? Let's say we're taking a look at buying a cell phone, a laptop, a car, maybe just new clothes, whatever it might be, right? It doesn't have to be anything extravagant. Chances are we've done a little bit of research ahead of time. We're walking in the door with a little bit of an understanding of maybe the different type of, at least maybe color or, types of service, whatever those things are, right? You're walking in more educated. You're not walking in the door to buy a car and waiting for that salesman to just show you everything, teach you, from ground zero, right? What you need and what you like. We've done that upfront research. And so that means that our expectations, to Norm's point, because we have so many resources at our fingertips, are changing. That also means as we look at the competitive dynamics, we are also able to see not only what your product or service might offer, but who are all of the competitors in the market that also have your same product or service, right? How do they differentiate? And how am I, as the buyer, going to decipher that by myself? Now, there are some times that buyers get it right, but there are other times where this is a lot of information overload, right? Think about if you were to do a simple Google search on any topic, right, or product, all the different search results that you're going to find, right? And so that's why it's so important for our sellers to have that guided approach, to understand, to Norm, to your point, that we're coming in the door at a different point than we have ever, before, because we do have some baseline knowledge, but that our sellers are able to meet them wherever they are in that conversation, right? And truly understand what it is they're going to need moving forward throughout their buyer cycle. And I think, Norm, you talked about making sure that as sellers that we're determining next steps based on what our buyers need, not what we want them to do, right? We always want them to buy what we're selling. That's definitely the goal. But if someone goes dark for a little bit, that's because as a seller, we thought we were at the decision-making point. Your buyer may not be there. And it's really important that our sellers are equipped with the knowledge and skills to understand that and make sure that we're with them in whatever point they are in the journey. So again, using that guided selling approach.
Absolutely. And I like where you put about the competitive dynamics intensifying. There are so many global competitors now. And so, I think back a few years in selling, you often, understand the buyer's needs, present a compelling solution, and close. And I don't think that works anymore. I think you used a very key term. It's just some notes I jotted down while you're speaking. But we have a model where you're really focusing on presenting value. And in today's world, that model includes differentiators. And think about what's the buyer's need, what's the solution, how is that solution differentiated, and how can you back that up with proof? So we now think it's not just need, solution, close, but it's really about need, solution, differentiation, and proof. And that really gives the sellers a much, a guidance, that they would need to really think differently about how they present their solutions, making sure it's a differentiated solution. You
Yeah.
also have some data on, better results. And, I go back to this email that I printed out that, number one from one of our participants, hope that person's actually with us today, need to increase my sales, exclamation point. So I know you have some data to support that.
Yeah. So these numbers really speak for themselves, right? This is from McKinsey, but this is all about when we are able to understand where our buyers are and use that guided selling experience, you are going to experience higher win rates, revenue growth, and shareholder returns. These are just some of the numbers we're calling out here. But what I think is important to understand is that in order to create a better buying experience, and Norm, you I think alluded to this just a second ago, the buying process is no longer linear, right? So it's no longer A to B, right? Our buyers are going through a little bit of a roller coaster based on their own research, what the anecdotes from their friends, right? We have online reviews. So there are all different things that are happening in their buyer journey at this point. And so the better equipped our sellers are to understand what that journey could look like, know where to come into the conversation, what truly matters is how that experience is going to be strengthened and how these results are going to come your way. And I think this is not only pre-sale, this also goes to post-sale as well. So the better conversations that we're having up front, the stronger relationships that are going to be maintained in partnerships with those customers moving forward. And hopefully that will then lead to potential, higher retention rates, upsell opportunities, expansion within certain customers as well. So certainly that's a whole nother topic of conversation, but something to think about.
No, it's exactly, the right point, because you mentioned it isn't linear. I think we both touched on that this morning, in a minute, and we'll just shift to conversations. But I know there's another model you're going to share in just a minute where it's not a linear model anymore. It's really a buyer-centric model. I want you to expand on that. So we think about, enablement, and we think about really, we talked about getting the right marketing assets, and to create openness, you have to have that right conversation at the right time. If it's not relevant, people today have unbelievable abilities to filter. Almost everybody has voicemail, so it's not like you're going to catch someone on the phone. Everyone can filter their email. They can decide what content they want to consume. They can decide what webinars they want to attend. Hopefully, they find value in the content, they come back. So making sure we have the right conversations at the right time is really critical to that buyer-centric experience. And think about some of the things we've learned as we move forward is we want to increase the frequency of touch points, and that doesn't mean we're phoning them more often. That may be, a combination of telephone, email, social networks, webinar invitations. So we have so many ways and so many different ways that we can interact with customers. So we have to start making sure we're adopting a multifaceted touch point strategy. We have to really take more time to understand their situation, because they're already farther along in their journey. We may not have really captured what their situation is in the way we may have historically, where we're engaging with them right at the beginning. They could be, pretty far along. And so if we don't really take the time to understand, we have to ask better questions, really understand what the needs are. And, quite often these needs are misunderstood. And I'll give you kind of two examples of the type of misunderstanding that can occur. One is someone, has a need and they state it, but the stated need isn't really the real need. So if I often use an iceberg example, they're just sharing what's above the surface. And we have to really be able to understand more about what's really driving that need. So what are the interests behind the need? And and if we understand that, because if you think about an iceberg, I think, and I'm not, don't hold me to this number, but like 90% of it is probably below the surface. So just understanding what those pain points are. Another example of, identifying the need is they'll present a need and we think that that's a compelling need. But, just a extreme example, if I have a leaky faucet, that's not a compelling need. If I'm talking to a plumber, plumber might have to identify what the total cost of that is over time. Whereas if I have a broken water main, that's a compelling need. So I think we have to think about what's going on beneath the surface. We have to also be able to develop and really better elaborate on the need. We have to deliver value throughout the sales process. We touched on that before. And the other thing I think we're seeing, and I mentioned collaborative learning, but also collaborating with customers. For the best experience possible, we need them to involve. So it's not, I'm the sales professional, I'm the sales expert, I interview you, and then I tell you what's right for you. I could take that approach, but it's not likely to be nearly as compelling or result in the higher win rates as if we're actually co-creating. So saying, based on what you share with me, here's what, here's some of the input. Does that look right? And we actually are developing that solution together. So just a couple of kind of high level thoughts on conversations. But, in the older days, I would say, product and services were, kind of the winner. Best products, best services would win. Today, I think that's shifted dramatically. And again, sir, I think you have some data on that.
Yes, absolutely. So as we look at, and we've talked a lot about the buyer experience already, but as we look at this data really shows and again, for B2B specifically, we know that the buyer experience is important, right? So almost 90% of buyers say that their experience is even more important or as important than the product or service that they're looking to buy. Yet we see that only 23% had an actual positive experience during their sales process, right? And so that's a massive gap. And so these numbers, and I think the story that they tell is showing there's a huge opportunity here to increase that experience for our buyers, really enhance it, right? And there's a couple of levers that we can pull and get some pretty quick wins from our sales teams in order to do that.
Absolutely. I think you touched on it before. You mentioned having the right processes. We would focus, on having the right skills. But it reminds me of an old adage, which is how you sell is as important as what you sell. And I think that's becoming increasingly important, that customer experience is really key. And I alluded to this model before because it's not a linear model, but you're showing a triangle here. And I just love the way, this kind of comes together. So did you want to just elaborate on that for a minute?
Yeah, so we've been using this phrase of customer centric, right, throughout today's conversation. And again, when I reflect on, our approach at Seismic from the enablement team, it is truly that customer centric model, right? Our internal customers are those folks that are interacting with our customer on a regular basis. Again, not only pre-sale, but post-sale as well. So that includes folks like obviously our sellers, but also our customer success managers, our product marketers potentially, right? Our channel partners team as well. So anyone who's really impacting that buyer experience. And so again, everything that we do, all of the goals, the alignment, the responsibilities that I mentioned earlier are all centered around making sure that we're enhancing our customer experience. And so what this model is really showing is this is an ongoing process, right? So in order to be a strong influencer, you really can't do that without effective communication, without really understanding what our buyers need and where they are in that journey. And especially the social media topic that we just talked about, that's one of the ways, especially in this remote workforce, we're going to be able to inspire and really connect our buyers, right? Connect with our buyers in ways that we may not have been able to do so before. And what I want to hit on here, going back to that social media presence for a second, is this doesn't only have to be social media posts about your product or service. This could also be a way, again, to connect with your buyer. There might be certain interests, right, that you want to share. Maybe in your particular territory, you are passionate about hiking. Maybe you are passionate about fitness or music, right? There are certain things that your buyers might be interested in as well. So even using those and doing so tactfully, but being able to use those interests to connect with your buyers even further than simply about your product and service is also going to be able, again, this is continuous model, right? It's going to give you the tools to be a strong influencer and continue to communicate with them effectively.
Absolutely. Really, really interesting. I think about, the way we connect virtually, and, you think about, go back several years, face-to-face selling, you might see something behind the buyer's desk that interested you and that caused a personal conversation. You can look for the same kind of clues, based on what's of interest to them and find mutual interest. And again, I think that's a way of building relationships and rapport that creates openness. So I'm going to jump to our last topic, and we're going to cover it fairly briefly because I want to add some time for questions. But to bring this all together, we can have a great sales enablement group. We can have a really strong team of sellers, but we need great frontline sales managers to drive these initiatives. So I'm going to ask a question. I'd love you guys to just participate again, like you have in the polls, and just this time it's a chat. So the question we'd like to pose is, how are your managers supporting sales enablement? And that's kind of an open-ended question, but again, we're really just looking for you to share, and we'll probably touch on some of the comments that you put in there. While you're doing that, I will just touch on a couple ideas for enabling the sales managers. So your team isn't going to be able to rebound alone. As we saw, more than half of the organizations polled had revenues that were down. So re-clarify what are the roles and expectations. It's a good time to do that. We've been working remotely, likely to continue. Make sure that the managers have the tools they need. Many managers have gone without any kind of training or coaching, particularly sales coaching. And I saw this in one of the people who signed up, and again, going back to Alonzo's email, how do I coach remote sellers? That's changed some. So we really need to focus on that. Onboarding is becoming a huge issue. Many companies that are doing well are continuing to add headcount. Companies that had to furlough people or reduce headcount are bringing back. So how do we build a better onboarding experience? How do we get managers, focused on the right things, eliminate some of the busy work, and to the point I made earlier, really focus on virtual coaching. So we have a couple of comments here. Sarah, any thoughts that you have? I'm going to just kind of scan the chat and just see if we can focus on some of these comments.
Yeah. So, when it comes to helping our sales managers be effective as well with enablement, I think a best practice, again, goes back to that alignment, right? And that communication internally. So something that we make sure we're doing, especially around larger initiatives and larger trainings, social media being one of them and social selling, is making sure that we are getting the managers involved upfront, right? That they have buy-in, that they have a chance to give their input as well, and that they can help us hold our sellers accountable for the expectations that we have, right? So we certainly want to make them a part of the conversation. And we look at our sales managers as partners in this process when it comes to enablement, right? So I think if you're not already doing that, shifting that mindset a little bit is really, really important. And especially when it comes to onboarding, I think this is a great point. Our sales managers are partners in that onboarding process. So enablement at Seismic, we have done a great job to revamp and really build and scale out our onboarding program. But the sales managers absolutely have an active role in that, right? And again, holding their reps accountable is part of I would say 50% of the equation, right, is building a great program. The other 50% is making sure that it's pulled through correctly and really executed on. And a sales manager can absolutely help and be that partner in doing so. So
a couple key themes I picked up on. Thank you. Is the idea of collaboration with sales enablement, alignment around goals, partnership in the onboarding process, and the accountability, so that we're really fully executing on the power of sales enablement. Time back to today's webinar title. I'm going to share a few takeaways, and I also want to use this opportunity to, first of all, thank all of you and for participating and joining us for the webinars. It's what makes it really exciting and interactive. Thanks, Sarah and the team at Seismic for joining us. And the takeaways are here. And again, if you have questions, please type them in. I'm going to turn it back to Alonzo. But sales enablement is crucial to keep sales teams on track. I think we know that. Most of you probably wouldn't have signed up if you didn't actually already believe that. Sales teams have improved how they sell. They've forced being able to improve how they sell virtually, how they sell socially. Delivering the right content at the right time is what really creates value during the buyer's journey. We have to deliver the best experience. Sarah had some very powerful data about the buyer experience and its impact on win rates and even ROI. And as we just touched on, sales managers play a crucial role in supporting the sales enablement initiative. So those are our takeaways from the day. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alonzo for some comments and hopefully some Q&A. So we have about a few minutes for some Q&A. Alonso, back to you. And again, Sarah and everyone who joined us, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Alrighty, Norman, thank you. And for the audience, if you have any questions, this is your chance. I'm not seeing any questions queued in. So if you have any questions, this is your chance to type them in. Looks like I'm not seeing anything come through. Okay, so that means we're gonna be able to give you some of your time back. With that, I wanna thank you, thank Norman and Sarah for this wonderful session filled with so much greatness. I hope you guys got as much value as you were expecting. And before we go ahead and close this webinar, if you still have any questions coming up later on, or you want to learn more about this topic, here you can see the contact information here in the Q&A slide. You can reach us at info@salesreadinessgroup.com or calling the number that you see on the screen, or you can also contact Sarah at Seismic. Just make sure you mention her when you fill the form at seismic.com/contact so they can pass your message to her. Let's see what else. I'm looking at the chat. Nope, nothing.
Alonso, I see one question, and maybe Sarah has something she could share with,
Go
and we
ahead.
could follow up offline, but I'm seeing a question. Does the panel feel that is a different approach to sales enablement in Europe versus the US? And I know, Sarah, you work with a lot of global clients. Any thoughts on whether things are different in Europe than the US or globally?
I am trying to find that question. So I just want to make sure I understand. So is the question just, is the approach different outside of the
Exactly.
US?
Is the way you approach sales enablement different in Europe than than North America?
No, not at all. So, especially at Seismic, we are a global organization as well. We have sellers all over the world. No, and if anything, because my team right now is mostly US based, if anything, the thing that does change for us is we try to increase our touch points with our global sellers to make sure that they feel fully equipped, especially being remote. But the approach is all the same, absolutely. The other thing I will add, though, for our global sellers and our sales managers is making sure that anything that we're doing is fully applicable for them. So before we roll out anything, making sure that we do have check-ins with those managers, and that if we need to pivot or tweak anything to roll that out globally, then we do so ahead of time.
And I'm seeing another question here in the chat about, do you feel an email campaign helps salespeople are restricted from pre-COVID in-person sales efforts? So if you can't, call in person, is email. And I would say email is one of many strategies, but we all receive so many emails. I think it has to be combined with social media. It has to be combined with some, what are called often sequences. We're using a number of multiple methods of reaching out. So I think email does play a role. The other thing that we didn't touch on so much, but I know that Seismic really powers this, is really good content marketing, and the idea that we have to find ways to deliver value virtually. And if we are going to use email or other channels, we have to really think about carefully, does the email create value? Because Sarah mentioned the idea of personal brand. If I continue to email people, but it's always about what's in it for me as a seller and not what's in it for them as a buyer, I'm going to quickly be on someone's ignore list. So it's an interesting question. Email is an important component of a multifaceted strategy, but in isolation, I think would have, limited results. So we really need to think about multi-touch points. Sarah, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's absolutely right. The other thing I would just want to highlight there is that personalization piece, right? So we've all received email campaigns before where my first name is missing or it's the wrong name, right? And I know that was not a personalized email to me, right? That was probably a robot sending things out. So those emails are immediately deleted, right? Our sellers find the most success when their emails are personalized, but personalized to a way where we're really trying to get to the heart of our prospects' true interests, right? They might be a certain an alumni of a certain school, right? Maybe their team just won a championship, right? That type of research and details are a lot of the reasons why some of our conversations start and then just continue to snowball, right? Because our reps are really putting in those personalized touches. But again, I think it's not just email, right? Email is a small piece of the puzzle, from your social to personal interactions, right? And other touch points as well, certainly phone calls. But email never hurts as long as you're doing it the right way and making sure that it's personalized.
So Alonso, I know that we may have a couple additional questions.
We do.
I see one more. Maybe we'll take one more. I know we're at the top of the hour, and then we'll try to follow up. But this one gets to the issue of empathy. And the question is, can you elaborate how important empathy is in tracking the customer's pain? How to teach this to a sales rep? I think empathy, it's not an easy thing to train someone on, but I do think the type of questions we can ask and the sensitivity we bring into the call is very important. So what I would say is, as we're discovering needs, particularly, if people are coming back, hey, just wanted to check in with you, Alonso, that, I know that you've probably been working from home like I have. So one of the ways of showing empathy is by being able to share a parallel experience, like I have. I'm just curious, how's that been working for you? You kind of get, so you kind of start to build a rapport, and you start to think about, what's really going on. You're not just coming in with this idea that I'm here to make a sale. Obviously, that's your function as a sales professional, but the best way to do that. And then I think asking the right questions really helps expose the pain points. And I think the biggest flaw is not just in what questions we ask, but taking the time to listen and making sure that we're actively listening and picking up on verbal cues and even visual cues. If the customer is on the other side of the camera and they're looking away, or they're checking their mobile device or have their arms folded, we're getting a verbal cue. So probably more than we could cover in a Q&A, but an excellent question. I think we'll probably take any additional questions offline. So Alonso, if you could just scan the Q&A and see if there's anything else.
There is one that Sarah may be able to answer briefly. Sarah, question is, what impact does culture have on sales enablement implementation?
Great question.
I was just typing, Tony. I was just typing an answer for you in the chat. So would love to connect on LinkedIn and talk about this further, because there is not enough time in the day for me to address this too briefly, but I'll be quick. So I think culture has a massive impact on enablement, right? And I think one of the reasons is because enablement still doesn't have a formal one definition across the board, right? It's being defined kind of as we go. And so I think the impact could be, you're going to have detractors that really don't understand enablement, or maybe the power of enablement, the role that it can play. And you're also going to have supporters. So I would say, if anything, our approach is typically focus on your detractors, right? And help them understand what it is you're doing, how it's going to impact the business or their respective team. But Tony, I'm also happy to share, if we can connect on LinkedIn, I'm also happy to share different ways where you can help shape that culture so that it's a little bit more enablement friendly, and help educate your key stakeholders and make sure that you get that buy-in so that you can really accomplish your key priorities.
Alrighty, that was actually the final question, so that we can make sure we can wrap up here.